And finally, last but certainly not least, tip number 10, melody. So in the modern equal tuning, all the chromatic notes are equal. They're all the same. There's no difference. In this tuning, there are slight differences. So it's pretty subtle, but there are some are bigger leaps than others between even those chromatic notes. And so I'd like to demonstrate just a little bit of how that affects the melody, because it actually can make some notes sound more mournful or brighter, or it's hard to explain. It's easier to demonstrate what I'm talking about. So for example, in this prelude of Rachmaninoff, you'll hear this first interval, which is a smaller interval than you normally will hear that minor second. And so that it makes it sound more mournful. Let me play a little bit so you understand. So even though we're in a sharp key, like G sharp minor, it's very bright minor key, and yet that has a mournful, plaintive sound to it that you don't get in the modern tuning. So here's another example of how the melody changes things a little bit in this tuning. You can hear in this left hand of the Chopin Waltz, that difference between sounds very mournful, very plaintive, and that only happens in this kind of tuning because the difference between these two notes is a little squeezed together, a little smaller than you'd hear otherwise. So one more example of melody is, again, Chopin on a Mazurka this time. And listen to how he uses this E. It's very interesting. He loved that in this piece. gets right to you, doesn't it? Like stabs you right in the heart in a fun way, in a strange way with this mazurka. But he really plays with that in this piece, and it's a characteristic of this tuning and this melody, and just the way that E falls in the skips between the notes in this kind of tuning. So that's it, 10 tips for how to play and interpret music in well temperament, the classical tuning. I hope you enjoyed it. There's probably a whole lot more, never-ending variety of things you can learn when you start exploring music with this tuning in a different way. And there's lots of other tips that I could come up with, but I think the best way to go about it is just to play it yourself and have fun with it, and really listen and try out a few of these things I mentioned, and see if it makes a difference in your playing. And I think you'll find that there's a whole world to explore, and it's an amazing world. And thanks for listening, and keep in tune.